The opening image is designed to stun the audience before they can emotionally prepare. Night has swallowed a wealthy suburban property that feels too quiet, too isolated for safety. Rain threatens but hasn't fallen yet, creating a heavy, suffocating tension in the air. Emily Carter is bound to a tree, not chaotically, but carefully, intentionally, signaling that this is punishment, not violence driven by rage. Her skin glistens with a sticky substance that instantly raises dread without explanation. It invites the audience to fear what they don't yet understand. Emily's breathing is controlled, showing strength, but her eyes betray panic, grounding the horror in human vulnerability. This contrast, discipline versus terror, forces viewers to lean in. The absence of screams is more unsettling than noise. It tells us she knows screaming won't help. From the first seconds, the audience understands one thing clearly. Someone planned this, and time is now the enemy. Richard Halston's introduction is chilling precisely because of how calm he is. At 62, he carries the confidence of someone who has never been challenged, and never expects to be. He doesn't shout or threaten. Instead, he watches Emily the way one watches an experiment. His line, "Let's see how long it takes before you apologize," reframes the entire situation. This is not about punishment for a specific act, it's about control. When he starts a timer on his phone, time becomes a weapon, transforming the scene into psychological torture rather than physical violence. His father-in-law status adds another layer of horror, turning family into captivity and trust into betrayal. The audience doesn't yet know what Emily did, or if she did anything at all, but they understand Richard believes he owns her. That belief makes him more terrifying than any loud antagonist could ever be. The cut to Daniel Carter deepens the emotional wound by introducing dramatic irony. He's stuck in traffic, frustrated by something trivial, his phone on silent, completely unaware that his wife is bound and counting seconds in terror. The audience now carries a burden Daniel doesn't, which makes every passing moment unbearable. Emily's internal monologue shifts the scene from survival to meaning. She doesn't think about escape first. She reflects on how power disguised itself as family, how control wore the mask of protection. Her realization, this wasn't about obedience, it was about ownership, reframes the entire story's theme. Then comes the insect. Small, ordinary, deadly in context. When it lands on her arm and her breath falters, the tension spikes to its peak. Richard watches. He doesn't intervene. Cut to black. The audience is left trapped between fear, rage, and the desperate need to know what happens next. Emily Carter didn't marry into cruelty. She married into comfort that slowly hardened into a cage. As a former social work graduate student, she once believed knowledge and empathy could protect people from harm. But when she quit school to support Daniel's career, her independence quietly dissolved. Wealth replaced purpose, and dependence replaced choice. Emily is not weak. She is observant, emotionally precise, and deeply aware of power dynamics, but those traits become dangerous in a family that thrives on control. She watches more than she speaks, noticing how generosity always comes with conditions, how kindness feels rehearsed. Her silence is not submission, it's survival. Yet survival has a cost. Each day, she feels herself shrinking inside beautifully furnished rooms, aware that money has replaced a voice. Emily's tragedy is not ignorance, it's clarity. She sees exactly where she is trapped, and worse, she understands who is holding the key. Daniel Carter genuinely loves his wife, but love without action becomes its own form of betrayal. Raised to idolize his father, Daniel learned early that peace meant obedience and silence meant safety. Conflict terrifies him, not because he's cruel, but because he was trained to believe confrontation destroys families. He notices Emily's discomfort at dinners, the way her posture tightens when Richard speaks, the careful way she chooses her words. But Daniel convinces himself that staying quiet protects her. In his mind, if he doesn't escalate, nothing can explode. This passivity is his flaw, not malice. He believes good intentions outweigh consequences, unaware that silence is already choosing a side. Daniel's tragedy is subtle. He mistakes avoidance for loyalty and calls it love. By refusing to challenge his father, he unknowingly becomes an accessory to Emily's isolation, present, affectionate, and devastatingly absent when it matters most. Richard Halston doesn't see himself as a villain, he sees himself as a necessary force. A retired corporate executive, he built his empire on hierarchy, discipline, and quiet compliance. To him, family is no different from a boardroom. Money is leverage, generosity is strategy, and discipline is how order is maintained. He despises chaos, and Emily represents everything he cannot control. moral clarity, independence of thought, and the courage to see wrongdoing for what it is. At family dinners, his humiliation is subtle, comments disguised as jokes, corrections framed as concern, watchful eyes that never blink. When Emily discovered his financial misconduct and confronted him privately, Richard didn't rage. He smiled. That smile was not forgiveness, it was calculation. His silence was a warning, not uncertainty. Richard believes respect must be enforced, and anyone who threatens that belief must be corrected, quietly, efficiently, and without witnesses. The inciting incident begins not with violence, but with a refusal. Emily refuses to lie. After uncovering Richard's illegal land dealings, documents hidden behind shell companies and forged approvals, she draws a moral line that cannot be negotiated. When she tells Daniel she may go to the authorities, it isn't a threat, it's a confession of conscience. Daniel panics. His instinct is not to confront corruption but to preserve the illusion of family unity. He begs her to wait, to think about consequences, to not destroy the family. In that moment, Emily realizes something crucial. Daniel sees the family as something that can be destroyed, but not something that can be wrong. His fear outweighs his ethics. This quiet disagreement becomes the story's true fracture point. Nothing explodes yet, but the ground shifts. Emily chooses truth. Daniel chooses delay. And delay, in this family, is dangerous. Daniel tells himself he's doing the right thing when he goes to his father. He frames it as concern, as damage control, as a son seeking guidance. He believes that if Richard understands the situation, he'll soften, compromise, maybe even fix it quietly. What Daniel doesn't understand is that Richard doesn't hear concern, he hears defiance. Emily's refusal to lie isn't just inconvenient, it's an existential threat to Richard's authority. Worse, it came through Daniel, which makes it public within the family hierarchy. Richard's response is calm, almost reassuring, which only deepens the betrayal. Daniel mistakes that calm for wisdom and leaves believing he has protected his wife. In reality, he has exposed her. This is the moment the story crosses a point of no return. The audience understands something Daniel doesn't. By choosing secrecy over solidarity, he has handed Emily directly to the person who wants to break her. The trap is set with politeness. Emily is invited over under the promise of talking it out, of restoring peace like adults. Daniel is sent away on a harmless errand, just long enough. When Emily arrives, the gates close behind her with a sound that feels final. Phones are confiscated under the guise of focus, framed as respect, not restriction. There is no shouting, no struggle, no sudden reveal of madness. Richard simply states the truth she was never meant to hear. You don't get to threaten a family and walk away. In that sentence, Emily understands everything. She is alone. What follows, the backyard, the tree, the honey, is not shown as spectacle, but as intent. Each step is deliberate, ritualistic, designed to teach a lesson. The status quo doesn't crack here, it shatters completely. From this moment on, survival replaces normal life. The story fractures into parallel timelines, heightening tension through contrast. Emily's world has narrowed to breath, sensation, and time. She focuses on staying conscious, counting inhales, grounding herself in small, controllable thoughts. Fear presses in, but she refuses to let panic take over, understanding that panic is what her captor wants. Meanwhile, Daniel moves through an ordinary evening that slowly becomes wrong. His messages go unanswered. A familiar unease creeps in, first dismissed, then impossible to ignore. The audience watches these timelines inch closer together, bound by the same ticking clock. Emily endures each passing second as a test of will, while Daniel's delay becomes a quiet indictment of his earlier choices. The power of this section lies in restraint. Nothing explosive happens yet. Instead, dread accumulates. Time becomes a character, stretching moments thin, forcing both Emily and Daniel toward realizations they can no longer avoid. Richard doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. His calm explanations are the true weapon. He speaks of lessons the way others talk about traditions, insisting pain teaches faster than love ever could. He hints at past corrections, never naming names, letting implication do the damage. Each word is designed to isolate Emily, to convince her that resistance is rare and compliance inevitable. At the same time, Daniel begins to awaken. He notices gaps in security footage, hours missing where there should be records. His calls ring endlessly. The realization hits him slowly, then all at once, he chose comfort over protection. By trusting his father, he betrayed his wife. This understanding doesn't come with heroism yet, only shame and fear. The emotional conflict intensifies as Daniel recognizes that silence didn't keep peace. It merely delayed violence. As the timer continues its merciless countdown, Emily undergoes a quiet transformation. Fear doesn't disappear, it sharpens. She stops imagining rescue and starts assessing options. Every sound, every shift in the air becomes information. The approaching storm mirrors her internal change. Pressure building, release inevitable. Ants increase, the discomfort rising, not shown in graphic detail, but felt through Emily's controlled reactions and clenched resolve. This is where endurance becomes strategy. She realizes survival won't come from waiting. It will come from acting at the right moment. Daniel, racing against time, understands too late that some choices can't be undone, only confronted. Both characters move toward irreversible decisions, shaped by guilt, clarity, and necessity. The clock keeps running, the storm draws closer, and the emotional distance between who they were and who they must become collapses. From here on, nothing can return to normal. The climax begins quietly, almost invisibly, with Emily's most decisive act. Hidden beneath fear and endurance was preparation. Using a concealed emergency device, one she activated with deliberate calm, Emily makes two calls that change everything. The first is to local authorities, her voice steady as she reports unlawful confinement, choosing truth over terror. The second call is more calculated, a journalist who once investigated Richard's company and never stopped watching him from a distance. This is not desperation, it's strategy. Emily understands denial will come faster than justice, so she moves ahead of it. Every second she endured becomes evidence, every moment of control a documented crime. When she ends the calls, something fundamental shifts. She is no longer a victim waiting for rescue, she is the architect of exposure. The punishment was never meant to break her. It became proof. And proof, unlike fear, cannot be silenced. Daniel arrives just as the air changes. He sees the backyard, the tree, the reality he spent his life avoiding. There is no room left for denial. The image of his father, the controlled patriarch, the protector, shatters instantly. Daniel doesn't scream. He doesn't rush blindly. Instead, he steps forward with a certainty forged from guilt and clarity. For the first time, he speaks without fear. He confronts Richard not as a son seeking approval, but as a man naming truth. Richard senses the shift immediately. Authority drains from his voice as police sirens grow louder in the distance. His composure fractures, first threats, then pleas, then rage. The transformation is grotesque and revealing. Daniel watches, finally understanding that what he called strength was always control. And by standing still, by refusing to look away, Daniel chooses a side he should have chosen long ago. The final twist lands not with surprise, but with devastating logic. Richard insists there's no proof, that no one will believe her, but Emily already anticipated that denial. Evidence has been uploaded, time-stamped, and shared beyond his reach. What he designed as punishment became documentation. As officers arrive and restrain him, Richard rages about reputation, legacy, and everything he believes he deserves. No one listens. His power evaporates the moment it's witnessed. Emily watches silently, not triumphant, not broken, but clear. Justice doesn't roar, it settles. Daniel stands beside her, finally aligned with action instead of intention. The arrest is not just legal, it's symbolic. Control gives way to consequence. Fear gives way to truth. This is the story's moral center. Abuse survives in silence, but collapses under exposure. The power has fully reversed, and it will never return to him again. The aftermath unfolds without spectacle, but with weight. Legal proceedings begin, slow and methodical, stripping away the myth of invincibility that once protected Richard. Court dates replace dinner invitations. Documents replace intimidation. Media exposure follows, not as sensationalism, but as consequence, headlines that focus on systems of power rather than individual scandal. The family fractures under the pressure. Some relatives deny, others disappear, a few finally speak. There are no neat apologies, only uncomfortable truths surfacing too late. Emily is no longer hidden, but visibility comes with its own exhaustion. She learns that justice is loud in public and lonely in private. The world moves on faster than healing does. This section grounds the story in realism. The damage doesn't vanish with an arrest. It lingers in conversations, in legal language, in the quiet realization that accountability reshapes families just as much as it dismantles abusers. Emily's recovery is not framed as triumph, but as practice. Trauma therapy becomes a space where she learns to speak without performing strength. Some days are productive, others are heavy with memory. Regaining autonomy happens in small, deliberate choices. What time she wakes up, what doors she locks, what boundaries she enforces. Returning to school is both terrifying and grounding, a reminder of who she was before control narrowed her world. She studies again, not to prove anything, but to reclaim her future on her own terms. Progress isn't linear. Confidence flickers, retreats, and returns stronger. The story resists the urge to rush her healing, showing empowerment as something built, not declared. Emily doesn't erase what happened. She integrates it, refusing to let trauma define her entire identity. Survival becomes growth, and growth becomes quiet, undeniable power. Daniel's reckoning is inward and uncomfortable. He accepts that love without courage caused harm, and that remorse means little without change. He walks away from inheritance, choosing accountability over privilege, severing the last tie to his father's control. Supporting Emily now means listening without directing, standing beside her without steering her path. Justice unfolds realistically, procedural, restrained, unsatisfying in its slowness. Richard faces consequences not as spectacle, but as law, hearings, restrictions, reputational collapse. There is no revenge fantasy here, only the steady dismantling of power. The resolution insists on truth over drama. Healing doesn't come from watching someone fall, it comes from choosing differently going forward. Emily and Daniel don't return to who they were. They become people who understand the cost of silence and the value of action. Empowerment, in this story, is not loud. It lasts. Months later, the story closes not with noise, but with space. Emily stands alone in a public park, surrounded by trees that move gently in the open air. There are people nearby, families, joggers, children, but none of them feel like threats. For the first time, safety isn't something she's guarding, it simply exists. The absence of fear is subtle yet profound. Her posture is different now, shoulders relaxed, breath unmonitored. This quiet ending matters because it refuses spectacle. Trauma didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. The world didn't become perfect, but it became livable. Emily isn't defined by what happened to her anymore. She's defined by what she survived and how she chose to move forward. The stillness of the park mirrors her internal state, grounded, present, and no longer waiting for something terrible to interrupt the moment. Emily reaches out and places her hand against the bark of a tree. The gesture is small, but it carries the weight of everything she endured. Once, trees symbolized captivity and control. Now, this tree represents grounding, stability, and choice. The texture beneath her palm is rough but alive, solid without being cruel. She closes her eyes and breathes, not counting, not bracing, just breathing. This moment reframes the past without denying it. The story doesn't pretend symbols lose power. It shows how meaning can be reclaimed. Emily doesn't flinch. Her body remembers fear, but it also remembers survival. This is closure without denial. She isn't erasing the memory, she's changing its ending. The tree is no longer an object of punishment, it's a witness to healing. In this quiet act, Emily takes ownership of the narrative that once tried to define her. The final line doesn't arrive as a speech, it arrives as truth. Emily's voice, steady and clear, carries the weight of the entire journey. He thought pain would teach me silence. Instead, it taught me exactly who I never want to be again. It resonates because it isn't about victory over another person, it's about self-definition. The story ends by returning agency fully to Emily, leaving the audience with reflection rather than shock. Power doesn't roar here, it settles into identity. Viewers are invited to sit with the idea that survival isn't just enduring harm, but choosing what kind of person emerges from it. The emotional satisfaction comes from restraint, not exaggeration. The screen fades not to black, but to understanding. The audience doesn't leave with adrenaline, they leave changed, carrying a sentence that feels earned, honest, and impossible to forget.